So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to tune into this episode. I am absolutely delighted that this season is rolling on at such a pace. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I want to thank everybody that's taking part in the In Conversation with series. My name's Dave Sleet, and I'm co-founder of A&A Psychological Accreditation. And today's conversation, I am absolutely delighted that finally, Marcus, we have been able to get this into the room. Marcus from Three Pillars Financial Planning, one of APA's collaboration partners. Thank you for joining us.
No problem, my pleasure.
It's, as I say, it's been a kind of hardship to kind of be able to work schedules and everything to be able to do this. So I'm really, really grateful. Why don't you give the audience out there a glimpse and an introduction to you and Three Pillars?
I'll do that. Good afternoon, Dave. Thanks very much for having me. Three Pillars Financial Planning. I suppose the easiest way to describe what we do is to help give peace of mind, I think, for most people. We are predominantly financial protection specialists. So we can help have people put plans in place so that when the unexpected happens, the financial turmoil that can come alongside those things can help be prevented or at least be eased. When these things do come along. Let's not be naive, life just does happen to a lot of people. So Three Pillars Financial Planning was created about, well, in my head it was created about 6 or 7 years ago, but in reality it was about 4 years ago. And unluckily enough, we then had a pandemic and all these things that come after it. So we've not exactly had the easiest of few years, but to give you a brief insight into what it means to me and how that it actually works is by telling you a quick story. And that is that I always had this vision of wanting to be able to tell people what they could do, what they should do and how to do it, but couldn't really get that on paper and didn't really know how to explain it properly. And I was abroad looking at, I was in Rome and looking at the ruins of the Roman Forum and all these sort of things, and it hit me. And when I look at these things, and anywhere else in the world, people have probably been in loads of places, when you look at these ruins, the things that are still standing most of the time are the pillars. The roof has been blown off, the walls are gone, floors are gone, but the pillars are still standing. And that's when it came to me as I want to help people put their own pillars in place so that when life does just happen and does come along and Mother Nature takes its course, you can have things that you can rebuild from, you can have things to rely on. So our role is to help people put their own financial pillars in place that will stand the test of time and stand the strength. That means when bad things do happen to people, we can take away some of the financial turmoil that comes along. That's kind of what we do in a woolly sort of way.
I mean, we met probably about, guys, must be about a year, just over a year ago. Okay. And one of the things that really struck both Siobhan and I when we met was the drive to do financial protections in a different way and coming at it from a really kind of human, person-centered position that really does stand out in the world of finance. And, you know, what was it that kind of drove that for you?
I think there's a couple of things. One of the things is obviously financial protection is something that everybody needs, but nobody wants. The reasons for having it is something nobody wants to think about. So I saw my role as the thought provoker. So my role is just to educate, is to tell people, here's what you could do, here's what you should do, here's what you can do, and then allow the decisions to be made by them for the right reasons. But the real things for me are that I lost family members at early ages. I've been through a serious illness myself. I've seen people that have had protection in place and seen the benefit it can have, and I've seen people without it and seen the consequences of not having it. And I think for me, insurance has always been just a thing that people think, oh, I better get it, or I should get it, don't get it. And there's no real empathy behind it. There's no conversation behind it. There's no education behind it. And for me, it's not the most interesting of subjects, I can tell you that. But I actually think that when people understand what it does, rather than necessarily why they just need it, I think we marry those two things up together, it becomes far more emotive, it becomes far more personal, because there's nothing tangible about it. That's the difficulty behind it. Yeah. So for me, it's the creation of real life for a non-tangible product. And I think I have to take my own experience into that, my education and working in the insurance industry for nearly 25 years, life, own health, all these sorts of things. And it just made me think, somebody needs to go out and tell the truth and be a little bit provocative, if I'm honest, and be a little bit of it's not just about how much you pay, it's not what it costs, it's the cost of not having it. Yeah, I think that's kind of what struck me most.
Yeah, and it comes down ultimately to the failure to plan is a plan to fail.
100%.
And when we look at businesses in the therapeutic arena, as the world has gone through what we have just gone through, and to an extent we're still going through. The media might not be jumping up and down about it, but there's a lot of families that are still going through the impacts, and will do for a long time. We know that the business side of the therapeutic arena has never really been given the support, the knowledge, the insight that a lot of other business arenas have had that focus on. And you said something to me earlier about, in the current situation, the need for these professionals is greater than ever.
Absolutely.
And we know that there are thousands, tens of thousands of professionals out there. But we also know from HMRC that the number of people that are closing their businesses down is also going up. And ultimately, when we look at reasons behind it, a lot of it is financial knowledge just isn't in play for those individuals. So what would you say to anybody starting a business? Just take it away from the therapeutic arena for a second. What would you say those kind of business plans need to kind of include when it comes down to finance?
Yeah, I think there's, regardless of your business, I think there's fundamentals that everybody has to do, and that's understand that you've got a safety net for yourself, whether that be a bankroll, whether it be savings, whether it be a safety net for costs and expenses. I think that's a pretty standard. I think people know that they have to have these things. I think there's a support network for me has been invaluable. And I think that's where the failings are sometimes, is if you don't know what you don't know. So being from this side of the business or from the financial side, I'm kind of lucky in that way that I would say things like having somebody from an accountancy perspective or a bookkeeping perspective, absolutely. Don't try and do it all yourself. Absolutely pointless. It's just another driver for stress. If you're not an expert in it, get an expert to do it. So I think there's that. I think there's having contacts, so knowing who to go to at the bank and not relying on call centers, but having relationships with individual people. I think when it comes to starting a business, other than your plan for what you want to do and how you want to get there, I think a lot of people envisage, oh, I've got this skill, or this is what I want to do and this is where I want to get to, but have no real pathway or storyboard in between. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's if you paint your own picture and then red flag it all the way along of all the potential consequences that could come at any one point, and then drive that down the way to say, well, if that red flag is there, what could I do to get rid of it? Or what do I need to do to combat that direction change? So expertise is one, and access to it. Never try and do it all yourself. Secondly, never be afraid to ask for help. That's the first one for me. It's something that you start a business and you think, yeah, I can do this, and it seems a little bit down on your own self to then ask for help. Just shout, just ask for help. It's always the first thing. I think be aware of your local surroundings, and I mean, who are your local finance professionals, who are your local banking professionals, who are your local even things like physical and mental health professionals. Support, I think, is there support networks for new businesses, Federation of Small Business. All of these little things people don't necessarily think about at the start. They think about, where can I get clients? How can I make money? Where is my office? And they've built this house, which is fantastic, and there's zero foundation underneath it. We build houses without foundations, they will fall down. Yeah. It's as simple as that.
And I mean, one of the things that kind of really stood out for APA in working with Three Pillars on the collaboration and pulling all of this information together was when we actually went through the ethical and psychological awards process. And you said something back at the beginning of that process around the impact of financial non-planning on mental health.
Yeah,
that really stood out for Siobhan and I. And you've seen this. You see this over and over again, that when there isn't those financial stepping stones for those, when those red flags come up, where do I stand when that happens? Mental health will always suffer, won't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't claim to be an expert in mental health at all, but I would think that for anything that can affect mental health, one of the best things is the preventative medicine, or the preventative aspects at the start. Is, what do we do with our lives? What do we do with our business? What do we do with our attitudes, with our own physical well-being, to try and stop those things from happening? I mean, don't get me wrong, there are things outside our sphere of control, and life will just happen. But if we can do enough to feel satisfied that if these things were to come along, I hope, I think, I pray I've done enough to try and combat them to some sort of extent. I would think personally, other than your normal things, or not normal, but your everyday things like bereavement, loss of job, divorce, all these things which can have a massive impact on people's mental health, finance has to be one of the biggest things. And a lot of those financial issues are because of a lack of planning. However, I have to be really clear. I think the lack of planning comes from a lack of education. I don't think it comes from anything else.
Yeah, and I think it's that know-how. When we are putting our businesses together as therapeutic professionals, we're given very little guidance around the business. We can do the therapeutic work, we can do the function of the business, but those pillars that support that and allow that to take place, invariably we find out, when we realize that there isn't a pillar in place.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the stark obvious ones to me are the fact that in the therapeutic industry, they're all humans. And I think this is the thing, is people in the world today, and I read the news and watch the news, and it's, so these people are here just to help us, and these people will sort us out. We need to remember that these individuals have their own issues. They have their own health. They have their own physical and mental health to take care of. And I think that I don't think that's a job, mental health therapy. I don't think it's a job. It's a vocation. I don't think there's any doubt in that. And for me personally, the world relies on certain individuals, whether it be nursing, whether it be therapy, whether it be emergency services, these sort of things. The world wouldn't function without them, or it wouldn't function properly without them. Yeah. So I think when it comes to that, I look at this as thinking, well, if they weren't there, what would it look like? So how do we take care of those people so they can take care of everybody else? Yeah. And I think, to me, that's where there's a big gap here, is that lack of education. And it isn't down to in the therapeutic industry, the people themselves. I think there's no real access to it. It's like, well, where do you go? So the obvious one was, you used to go to the bank all the time for your answers. Well, they're closing down branches every single day of the week. There's just a lack of access to it. I can go online and try and do it all myself. I wouldn't go online and try and give myself mental therapy. Why would you go online and try and do your own finances? It just doesn't work. So it's having that access, and that's about exposure. And that's where I see my role a lot of the time, is that education thing. So if I shout loud enough, I hope more people will hear, who can then take on the information that I provide them with and make decisions for themselves.
Yeah,
that's kind of where I see it.
And that's that ethical and psychological approach that not only got 3 Pillars the contribution award last year, but it also got you the directors award from the Apple executive team, because we haven't been able to find anywhere in the financial sector that will connect the dots in the way that you do with mental health. And your team have always come across, in all of the conversations that I've had with any of them, as not trying to sell me a product, but trying to guide me in understanding what options are.
Absolutely.
And that, for me, is a fundamental difference in supporting therapeutic professionals, because you're working in a very similar approach where the therapeutic professional is not trying to tell somebody what to do, trying to give them options that they can understand.
I think, David, sorry to interject, but I think you're exactly right. And that hits the nail on the head for me. It's not the what, it's the how. That's the difference. I mean, if I went to go to any sort of counselling or mental therapy and somebody said, right, what you've got to do is this list of things, it probably wouldn't help me, because some of them I wouldn't even know what they meant. I wouldn't know where to go, who to speak to, what to do, when to do. I think if somebody shows you or helps you understand how, that's the thing for me. And I'm so glad that you said that about the team, because you like to surround yourself with people who remind you of yourself. But we all seem to have that same sort of ethos, that if the client is at the heart of everything we do, we will get reward, whether it be mentally, whether it be financially, whether it be professionally. We will get those things, but we have to do what's right. So the whole business is built on the fact that you as a client, for instance, if the worst was ever to happen to you or your business, you could only ever come back to me and say one of 3 things. And that is, Marcus, I'm glad I took your advice. Marcus, I wish I had taken your advice. Or Marcus, why didn't you tell me? And I will never hear the last one. To my detriment sometimes, because I do quite a lot of talking. But I like to think that people then have a choice to make. Is either go with the advice of a professional, choose not to take the advice of a professional, but at least get the advice.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. But it's the where do you get it? How do you get it? And what does it mean to me? And I think that's the key points that are lacking, not just in therapeutic industry, but everywhere. I just think this lack of knowledge, this lack of education, this lack of support, it's just there. There's a massive expectation on people just to know how to do things.
And this is one of the reasons why the In Conversation series this season is focusing on how do we get those people that are in the private practice to be able to succeed and build those businesses successfully. And as you say, those financial stepping stones are a key component. And we're not just talking about indemnity insurance, which every professional, if they haven't got, stop seeing claims, right? It's that straightforward, right? If you don't have it, don't do it. But you've got a whole heap of other options, and it's not a straightforward kind of pathway, is it?
No, it's not. And I think again, it leads into the realms of everything nobody wants to talk about. Which is the irony in there. We're working with therapists is actually quite bold, on the basis that therapists only want people to talk about things they don't want to talk about. So for me, it's things like, indemnity insurance is one thing. So obviously indemnity insurance covers you against if you've got either accidents or complaints. It can protect you, your business, to a certain extent. I then take it a little bit further and say, well, before the business, what about you as an individual? So do therapists suffer from poor mental health? I would think they probably could at times. Does that then mean they need to take time away? Do they need to recuperate? Do they get signed off by medical professionals to say you can't work just now because, one, it's not doing your own health any good, but it's probably not doing the health of your patients any good either. So I say, well, what happens at that time? Because without you working, you're not getting paid. So the block standard for me is the three pillars are income, health, and life. You can only have good health and have a fulfilling life if you've actually most of the time got an income to support it. If you've not got the income, the rest of it will deteriorate. It absolutely will. So having basic standard income protection in place for yourself to ensure that you can still retain an income while you're unable to work will protect you personally. I think having the same for your business, where it could generate an income while that business was closed because of your poor health or accident or severe illness, for instance, I think is another one. I think if there are more than one of you in the business, can it function with only one of you? What happens if it happens to one person? The other person then takes on a lot more work, a lot more stress, a lot more responsibility, which can then affect their health. So you can put in place plans to help protect each other, so that if one isn't there, do I have the funds available to recruit a temporary replacement, for instance? We all know that contractors cost far more than employed people. So if it's for shortened periods of time, where does that money come from? Because it's all well and good saying, I'd just get somebody else in. But where does the money come from that?
Yeah.
So I think there's those things. And then I think it's, what is the pass-on strategy for your business? What do you want it to do? Do you want it to leave a legacy, or do you want the doors to close the day you're not there? If you want it to continue, and I'd like to think that most therapy individuals or therapeutic individuals would want to, because of the role that they do by helping people in a wider way, is for what they've done to continue, regardless if they were there or unable to do it themselves. But that legacy needs planning. You need to have things in place that support the financial aspect, because you can have all the will in the world, you can have all the knowledge in the world, and I tell you right now, 99% of businesses will not function without finance. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a little bit like oxygen, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a little bit. Yeah,
it needs to be coming in. And I suppose, you know, when you look at what APA puts in play in the way of support for members and professionals through passive income to kind of maximize the opportunities for those professionals to generate legacy, as well as generate their income, you know, on a day-to-day basis, is one thing. The support for business development through the starter pack, through the coaching options to go through all of those business canvases and making sure that those stepping stones are in place. But then to be working with companies like yourself and Three Pillars to be able to really hone in on what does those grains of sand in the cement actually look like, that gives you that best cohesive solution moving forward. Do you see a future? I know you mentioned education, but do you see a future where the entire financial understanding is appreciated for its importance? Or do you think we're going to carry on with what we've had for the last 280 years?
I don't think we'll ever see it fully. I think it is quite a fluid industry that I work in as well, and there are lots of changes. I think there'll always be, as most people will tell me, there's always something for me to say, but I think that things do change so often, but so do people's lifestyles, and so do people's jobs, and so does income streams, and so does the way that that people treat patients or treat clients. I think all these things have to be quite fluid because of the world we live in. I think we're getting there. I think that the insurance industry, if I take that in isolation, has had a bit of a wake-up call on the basis that there's such a protection gap in this country. I think it's about £2.3 trillion or something. Wow. between the people who actually need protection and the people who have it. But that gap seems to have been the same for about a decade. But the thing is I think the insurance industry itself understands it, but they need help, and they need help with engagement. And that's the thing, is we understand, or I understand personally, what I need to tell you. But unless I get to speak to you, it won't matter what I know.
Yeah.
So
you only know what you know.
Yeah, exactly. But then the failing that can come from the industry there is how do you know what to ask for? You don't. So there is this disconnect that will probably always be there to a certain extent. I think it's my role to educate, but that's not educate now. I think we could educate a lot earlier. I think I mentioned to you earlier that I think we could be doing things in schools. I think we could definitely be doing things in universities when people are about to leave university and go into work for the first time. As you quite rightly put to me, you very rarely use algebra in everyday life. But the thing is how do you work a budget? How do you control your own finances? How do bank accounts work? All of these sorts of things are the basic fundamentals of good finance as you go through life. And insurance is a key part of that. You're not allowed to buy a house without it. You can't drive a car without it. For me, you probably should have it every time you have children, every time you buy a house, every time you get a job, every time you've got an income. Definitely if somebody relies on you from a professional or personal perspective. So that gap, I think, will probably always be there to a certain extent. However, I think from both sides, we're trying to move it. I just think we could be working a lot smarter than harder, if I'm honest. I think there's lots of professionals out there like me who have a deep passion for what we do to get a message across, because I understand if the message is relayed properly, people will get it. But the opportunity to do it isn't there. Social media has been a massive thing. That obviously helps. Sessions like this for yourself is a massive thing. I'm truly proud to even be asked on this. It's a big thing for me. My own mental health has suffered in the past. You get stress as a business owner. We've all lost people in life. So mental health is quite close to me anyway. But then doing what I do and seeing the impact, we just need to do more. But I think the way to do it, and this is now a long answer, but in a short answer, I think we need to work together. The individuals from separate sectors have to be willing to collaborate. They have to be willing to say, I'm not an expert in that, but I know a man who is, or I know a woman who is, or I'm willing to just have you come and speak to the people who I speak to. I think the more that businesses and individuals understanding the wider effect they can have on a huge group of people by working together will save millions of people running about and nobody getting anywhere.
Yeah. And, as you know, APA has spent what is now coming up to our third birthday next month. Wow, 3. Our toddler is growing, Marcus. Yeah. Our toddler is growing.
Past the terrible 2s now. So.
thankfully. But you've watched us work those collaborations and build those support systems and have those conversations around collaboration. Do you think that the mental health sector and the insurance sector are doing enough together? Bearing in mind, we are just 2 companies sat here with our own audiences. But do you think that the sectors are doing enough to work together?
I think they're doing more than they ever were before. I think a lot of within the insurance sector, a lot of the providers are now providing added value benefits. So not just the financial aspect that comes with insurance, but they're also aligning themselves with GP services that you can get over the phone or virtually, therapeutic sessions, whether it be for mental health or physical health, i.e. physiotherapy, counselling, bereavement counselling, these sorts of things. A lot of these things are the wrong word is added, but are in the plans that you can get at no extra cost. So I think they are doing them. I think everybody's acutely aware of mental health. I mean, let's not be naive. You go back 10 years ago, it was something that just wasn't talked about. You never saw an advert on the TV for poor mental health, for instance, whereas now, and quite rightly so, it should be talked about and it shouldn't be anything to be embarrassed by. And I think the insurance sector has has got that. I think they understand they need to do more of it. Bearing in mind, you go back a few years, if you had any sort of poor mental health issue, the chances of you getting insurance were limited. And that is growing. So there's more and more people getting protected and getting the insurance they need, even with mental health history or current poor mental health. So I think they are doing more. From a mental health perspective, as in that sector, are they doing enough? I don't think they know what to do. I don't think it's their job to do it. I think it's the insurance sector's job to provoke that thought. But having said that, I still think there needs to be this proactive willingness to talk to each other. You and I, we always have open and honest conversations. I've loved working with you so far. I think what APA does is fantastic. But I think there's also a need for you and I to have deeper conversations about, well, what does the fundamental bottom line of your industry look like? As in, who's in it? How many are they? What kind of lifestyles do they lead the individuals themselves? What effects could happen to their businesses? Because if I can educate one person, which is you, and you can educate your sector, I think that is an easier job than me trying to educate 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people. And I think that goes the other way about. I think if you were to come to the insurance sector and educate them on what this industry looks like, why would we not listen to the expert?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is listening to the expert, learning the craft to become the expert, and Absolutely. Then sharing that and elevating that knowledge across the board. And I think you and I, and you know, Siobhan probably more so, will say that it's time for the mental health sector to come out from its silo Absolutely. And talk to those other industries about what it looks like, not what it should look like.
Yeah, and maybe this is just my naivety, so excuse if it is, but I've always seen the mental health sector as overly private. And I don't mean private from a finance perspective. I mean private as in it's sort of within itself. It's sort of like, because it's not talked about, or it shouldn't be talked about, or it is very personal, that it seems to be quite insular. Now, if that's my naivety, I apologise, but I think that needs to change.
Yeah.
We're not saying, sorry.
I'm just going to say, perception is a big part of why there is stigma, is why there is that understanding of, I don't want to go in there because I don't know what I'm going to get. And that has to be broken down. And I think, you know, APA is working really hard to kind of make sure that, you know, conversations like this are breaking down those barriers, you know, as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think that those barriers have to be broken down, and it can only happen through collaboration. It's one person isn't going to change the world. It just won't happen like that. There are so many individuals within the insurance sector that have passion, have knowledge, have a want, have a willingness to do this. But again, they don't necessarily know where to go either. So I think if there is a little bit more openness to talking to each other in that education and giving people a platform, because I think advice is only great when it's taken, right? I think that's the thing, because other than that, it's just noise. It's not really advice. However, I'd rather have advice and not use it than not get it at all. So for me, it's not even the people, it's not even the advice, it's the platforms from which they can give that advice. Things like this are fantastic because you go out to a larger audience that I will never ever get to speak to, because one, I don't know who they are. Two, unless it happens to me personally, I'll probably never come into contact with it an awful lot. But that's why I think just we all have a direct correlation. You always say you're only about one person away or two people away from somebody else you know. I think businesses are exactly the same. There is an absolute direct correlation between the mental health industry and what I do. Simple as that. There absolutely is. Because I know for a fact and have seen it in its most horrific of practice, the mental health devastation that can happen to people when the financial impact of the unforeseen happens. It's life-changing. But the preventative medicine is what I do to stop that, and the therapy to go alongside it. How can anybody not think those two things work together?
Yeah, and this is why I absolutely love working with you. I know it's why Siobhan loves spending any kind of minute that she can get with you and the team is kind of gold dust. The kind of moving things forward, being able to access qualified therapeutic professionals at the point of need is a must that the insurance sector is starting to acknowledge and take on board. But for the therapeutic professionals in their businesses, being able to reach out to insurance providers that are operating in their areas and saying, hey, I am here, I am available. If you have policyholders that are in need of that support, then I am here, isn't a hard ask, is it?
I don't think so. I think that any businesses will align themselves with individual businesses. So you may have a provider that uses a specific, distribution method for that. So a specific company that deals in multiple mental health issues or whatever it might be. But it's not a hard ask. I don't see why insurance providers can't have a list of local experts. So when somebody does phone to claim, for instance, because let's be honest here, the real mental health issue with finance doesn't happen until the worst has happened, because we can't plan on it. It happens. Yeah. So at point of claim, I think personally, the insurance industry could probably do more, and they are doing a lot more. So I want to detract from that because they are doing much more. But is there any reason why they couldn't say, where do you live? By the way, here are 5 people you could talk to. Here are 10 people in your area that specialize in the situation you're going through. We would encourage you to go and see them. I personally don't think that's a big ask, because the claims process for the insurance industry is now, if you want a good word, is magnificent. It's just brilliant compared to what it was like, because it's so personal now. It used to be you'd phone up, you get a form, you fill it in, you send it back, and you would never ever get to speak to anybody, and you might get a check through the door. That's kind of how it worked. Now you're taken on a journey. Your hand is held all the way through, which is exactly what therapeutic individuals do with people with mental health issues. So why should that be any different? Because it's too easy to say, oh, here's your finance. But then what do you do with it? How does it work? What should be the best thing I do with this? But at the same time, I've got the stress of a bereavement. I've got the stress of a serious illness. I've got children who are now coping with me being stressful. All of those things, and it'll build up and build up and build up. All it needs is intervention. And that intervention has to be proactive, though, because very, very few people, in my opinion, will ask for it.
Yeah.
It needs to be provided.
Yeah. And those service providers that have that contact point at point of crisis, being able to have those tools of signposting to things that are actually relevant and effective at that point of need is a hell of a lot more useful than there's the number for the NHS's waiting list that might be 9 months away. And for those professionals that are starting out and wanting to get their business plans and canvases all working, functioning for their aspiration, having those pillars under themselves to support that is a fundamental. And for anyone who's watching, if you are in that situation, if you are going through your business startup, then reach out, take a look at getting yourself the APA starter pack, which will give you all of the baselines for your business canvas. It will give you your templates for client work, all of the support systems that are there. And then we can arrange for you to have that canvas worked with someone from 3 Pillars to make sure that you've got those financial protections in play. And what you decide to do with the advice from 3 Pillars is entirely down to you. but that gives a massive launch pad, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, massively, because again, it's you don't know what you don't know. And if that's provided for you at the very start, I think you can then, as you quite rightly said, do with it what you like. I think a lot of the time people don't ask for advice because they think, what's it going to cost? I think that's a big thing for people, especially when you're starting a business, is I'll take it on myself to do this because I don't have the finances, I don't have the capital to do what I want to do. What I would say is the advice that we give comes at no cost. What you do with it is entirely up to you. If you want to do something with it, then we can help you put plans in place, and what you'll pay for are the plans. You won't pay for us. And I think that's a key part to this, because that shows you, if you want an old-fashioned phrase, that shows I've got skin in the game. It means that I'm here to do the best for those people. Because if I don't do the best job possible, we wouldn't be in business. Yeah. Whereas if I could just charge you whatever I wanted, there would be no real need for me to give you the best advice, would there? Because I'd be getting paid anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why our business runs the way that it runs. But for me, it's about the quality of the advice. It's not about the quantity. It's about the bespoke nature of the advice. It's not about the depth. It's about making it real to you. It's not about using terminology from insurers. It's not about making it difficult to understand. It's about just putting things into context, into real life, and what they mean to you now, but what they absolutely could mean later on, when the unexpected. Now, we all hope it never happens, but let's not be naive. We're not all Superman, so everything can happen to all of us.
Hey, look, I'm living proof that the Superman cape is well and truly hanging up.
But I think APA do exactly the same thing, though. You're taking it back to basics, if I'm honest. You're trying to. I'm not saying you're trying to reinvent the wheel, but what you are doing is coming back and saying, let's stop the wheel from rolling for a minute and make sure that it's actually the right wheel. And I think by saying that, does it have enough air in it? Is it the right shape? Is it for the right person? Is it for the right vehicle? That's kind of what the wheel needs to look like. And I think with what you are doing, and the thing that stood out to me more so, is this provocative, unsolicited, proactive want to help people. It's something you just don't see an awful lot of, if I'm honest. Most things that come with these things on the other end are what's in it for me. And that's usually what we get told nowadays. But APA don't seem to be doing that. I hope our business doesn't come across like that, because it's not the way that it is. We're genuinely here to help people, and we know if we do that, we'll get paid for it. And
that's the art of the collaboration. And thank you for that. It still kind of pulls when I hear other people's take on what the company does, and I know Siobhan's the same. I mean, she's with clients at the moment, but we both get that sense of this is a sector that is expected somehow to keep delivering without those pillars underneath it that are there simply to allow it to deliver.
Absolutely.
And the individuals that are at the front end of that have traditionally been so far removed from the support system, because the support system hasn't been there for those professionals, but it's been there for the support system.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense to me. And I think that's the key thing, though, is there's the expectation. So there's an expectation that nurses will always be there, that emergency services will always be there, that therapeutic individuals, whether that be for physiotherapy, for mental therapy, cognitive therapy, whatever it might be, there's just this expectation from us that they'll always be there. I think I have to step aside from being a human being sometimes and look at this as a business owner and think, well, my clients are people who need those people. So what can I do as a business to ensure that we collaborate and work together to ensure that they are always here? The one thing I would think that most businesses close down with, other than poor financial thought at the beginning, is the health of the individuals involved, because that's something that is almost uncontrollable. But that health, when that fails, the finances can keep it going. And when the two of them aren't there, well, then nothing will work. So I think that's why they go hand in hand, as far as I'm concerned.
And this is why it's an absolute pleasure to spend time with you. I hope anybody that has watched this episode will get the sense that the financial protections, the financial building blocks that allow you to succeed in business do not have to be a minefield of the unknown. There is an amazing collaboration within APA that allows you to get that knowledge. And as Marcus said right at the beginning, you only know what you know. And if you don't know, then get the team in place. Have that team around you that allows for that knowledge to be there, because it will only support the businesses that you're building. But Marcus, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Go. Okay.
One last question. If any business owner who is starting to feel like this isn't working had on the financial side, what would be that one tip at that moment in time?
I think if you're at a point where you think it's maybe starting to get away from you, or maybe starting to think, I don't know what to do, is this will sound quite old-fashioned. Take a breath, step away, stand back, calm down a little bit. But the one thing to do is just open your eyes to what's around you. Ask, just go and look for it. If sometimes you don't know where to look, Google's a wonderful thing, by the way. But I think sometimes friends, family, again, you're probably never removed from the one person or the two people that can help, but you won't know that unless you ask. And I think that's a real fundamental. It sounds a bit woolly that you just ask for help. It's knowing who to ask and what to do. What I would say is the one thing to do is be resilient. And that's really difficult, but stand your ground. If you are so passionate about what you do and understand the need for what you do, allow that to hold you up. Allow that to be your strength. Allow that to stand with you on the shoulders of giants and say, this isn't going to stop me now, because I'm willing to ask for help. Because I would think that any therapeutic, especially from a mental health perspective, would be saying that to people who are feeling that way mentally just now. They'd be saying, listen, stand your ground, ask for help, look to the support of others around you, but don't be afraid to ask. That's the one thing. And even if you're asking the wrong person, they might have somebody who knows the right person.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing for me, is just talk to people. I know it sounds really ironic. That's exactly the same as what you guys would do, but it genuinely is. It genuinely is. I couldn't have survived in business if it hadn't been for the people around about me.
And that's a key factor. And I'm really glad that you picked on that, because if any of the therapeutic community are in that situation, please remember that APA holds Open Contact Thursday, where you can have that direct conversation with the executive. You can ask those questions. And if we can't answer it, then we have an entire body of collaboration partners behind us that will invariably be able to support and be able to guide. So please know that APA isn't just there as, you know, the complaint handling operation for the therapeutic sector, the ethical framework, etc. That support system is there for every single one of the professionals by using Open Contact Thursday. So let's wrap this one up. If you have benefited from any of this conversation, you can get a CPD for it. All you need to do is fill out the CPD questionnaire that will be attached to the video in the description. Get that back to us and you will have that knowledge validated. That gets you the CPD. So Marcus, thank you so much. I look forward to more of our conversations, and hopefully we'll be announcing fairly soon some quite interesting projects
I hope so.
to support people that we're both working with.
No, thanks again, David. It's been an absolute pleasure. My thanks to everybody else for listening. I hope it has been beneficial. And if anybody needs any help, they just need to get in touch.
Brilliant. Take care, one and all, and we will see you again in another episode very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.